Most people think retirement is a race you run for 40 straight years. Save hard in your 20s, save hard in your 30s, keep going through your 50s. Then if everything goes right, you finally get permission to stop. But there's another version of financial independence that flips that entire idea upside down. It doesn't say you have to save forever. It says you may only need to save hard for one specific season of your life. Then if the math works, time takes over from there. That idea is called Coast Fire, and it does something most personal finance advice refuses to do. It separates retirement saving from working itself. By the end of this video, you'll see the exact math. You'll see what happens if you invest early and simply stop, and what it costs someone who waits just 10 extra years to start. Traditional retirement advice says save aggressively so your investments can fund your entire life as soon as possible. Coast Fire asks something different. Build the engine early enough that even if you never add another dollar, it can still grow into what you'll need by retirement age. After hitting that number, you're not fully retired. You still need to earn enough to cover today's bills, but you no longer need to panic about funding age 65. That one shift changes almost everything, because for a lot of people, the real weight isn't just working. It's working while feeling permanently behind on the future. Here's the actual math. Fidelity's 2026 market return summary notes the S&P 500 has averaged around 10% annually over long periods. That's not a promise for any single year. So for this example, use 7% as a simplified planning assumption, not a guarantee, just a more conservative planning tool. Say your goal is $1.5 million by age 65. At 25, you'd need roughly $100,000 invested for that alone to grow into $1.5 million by 65. With zero more contributions, at 30, you'd need about $140,000. At 35, about $197,000. At 40, about $276,000. Same retirement goal, same assumed return, a completely different required starting point. And the only thing that actually changed was time. That's the entire mechanism hiding inside Coast Fire. The younger version of anyone doesn't need to be smarter or pick better stocks. They just need to hand compounding more years to work with. And here's where it gets uncomfortable, because it reveals something most people learn far too late. The first dollars you invest are not equal to the last dollars you invest. A dollar invested at 25 gets 40 years to work before 65. A dollar invested at 45 only gets 20. That's not hopeless for the 45-year-old, but it is a different job for the same dollar. That 15-year gap doesn't feel enormous while it's happening either. A few delayed years in your 20s rarely feel dangerous in the moment. Take a concrete example. Someone invests $500 a month from 25 to 35, then stops completely. That's $60,000 contributed total over that decade. At 7% growth, that account could reach roughly $650,000 by 65, even without a single additional contribution after age 35. Now compare that to someone who starts at 35 and invests the same $500 a month all the way to 65. That's $180,000 contributed, 3 times as much money out of pocket. At the same assumed return, they land in roughly the same neighborhood as the first person, because the first person simply bought an extra decade of compounding time. That's the part almost everyone misses. Coast Fire isn't magic, and it isn't laziness. It's the recognition that early money carries unusual power. And if you build enough of it soon enough, later life gets genuinely more flexible. Not because you're rich today, because your future retirement is already funded enough to keep growing quietly in the background. This is also why the strategy feels psychologically different from typical financial advice. Most people hear financial independence and picture extreme sacrifice, never eating out, never traveling, living like a spreadsheet with legs. That works for some people. Most people can't sustain it forever. Coast Fire offers a different bargain. Save aggressively for a few focused years, not to retire at 35, but so your 40s and 50s feel less trapped. What if the goal was never quitting work forever? What if the goal was simply making work less desperate? Coast Fire doesn't necessarily make anyone financially independent today. It makes the future considerably less financially fragile. But there's an important warning built into this. Coast Fire only works if the math is honest. You can't just say, I have some money invested, so I'm probably fine. You need 3 numbers: your target retirement figure, your current invested balance, and the number of years until that money needs to actually be available. Then you discount the future target back to today's dollars. If you want $1.5 million at 65 and you're 35, that's 30 years of runway. At 7%, the Coast number lands around $197,000. Have that much already invested at 35. And under these simplified assumptions, contributions could stop and still reach the target, have 100,000 instead. And the goal isn't there yet, but it isn't lost either. Now there's a measurable gap instead of a vague anxiety. That's what makes Coastfire genuinely useful. It turns, I need to save more forever into, I need to close one specific gap. One of those is endless. The other one has a finish line. But this is also where the biggest mistake shows up. People confuse Coastfire with permission to stop paying attention entirely. Coasting doesn't mean ignoring the money for 30 years. It means new retirement contributions aren't required under the current assumptions, and the invested money still needs to stay invested, still needs occasional rebalancing, and still needs protecting from panic selling during a crash, because life changes the target constantly. The Bureau of Labor Statistics reported CPI up 3.4% year over year in July 2026. Healthcare costs surprise people. Housing moves faster than expected. Children, job loss, and taxes can all shift the number. So Coastfire shouldn't be treated like a tattoo. It's closer to a dashboard, something checked periodically, not set once and forgotten. If markets have a rough decade, the Coast number can rise. If lifestyle gets more expensive, the target rises too. If income grows or expenses shrink, the target can fall. None of this guarantees anything. Markets can fall. Inflation can run hotter than 7% assumes. Life can genuinely interrupt any plan built on these numbers. The second common mistake is keeping the money in the wrong place entirely. Coastfire depends on real growth, usually a diversified portfolio inside tax-advantaged retirement accounts. For 2026, the IRS set the 401k employee contribution limit at $24,500 and the IRA limit at $7,500 for people under 50. Those account types matter because fees and taxes can quietly change the entire outcome. A high-fee portfolio earning less than expected may not coast the way the spreadsheet promised. Here's the cleanest way to think about the whole system. An emergency fund protects the present. Investments fund the future. Coastfire begins the moment the future has enough invested momentum that the present no longer has to keep feeding it. That's the real strategy underneath all of this, not quitting work, not becoming rich overnight, but front-loading the responsibility while time is still cheap, because time is the one asset young investors usually have far more of than they realize, even when money itself feels genuinely scarce. The Federal Reserve's 2026 Household Well-Being Report found price increases remained Americans' most common financial concern, so telling everyone to max out every account immediately just isn't realistic advice. Coastfire doesn't require perfection. It requires understanding the order of operations, build basic stability first, avoid high-interest debt, capture any employer match available, then invest early enough that compounding gets real decades to work with. The earlier that happens, the less heroic the rest of the plan has to be. That's the quiet mechanism behind Coastfire. It replaces lifelong financial intensity with one period of focused acceleration. Then lets growth carry more of the weight from there. It's not just about discipline, and it's not just about income. It's about when the money enters the system, how long it stays there, and whether it gets left alone long enough to actually do its work. Because the most powerful part of this isn't the day contributions stop. It's the day the future stops waiting to be rescued, because it's already growing quietly, automatically in the background. And once that clicks, retirement stops looking like a finish line 40 years away. It starts looking like a math problem that can be solved far earlier than most people ever assume.